It is 11 o'clock at night in South Central Los Angeles, 1987. You are lying in your bed, and you can hear a helicopter, not passing through, circling. The searchlight sweeps across your ceiling through the gap in the curtains. White light, then dark. White light, then dark. Somewhere outside there are sirens, then a sound you have learned to identify the way other people identify birdsong. Gunshots. 2. Then one more. Then silence. You don't get up. You don't look out the window. You already know better than that. You pull the blanket up and you wait. Because this is not a crisis. This is Tuesday. This is what it felt like to live in South Central Los Angeles in the 1980s. Not the version the news showed you. Not the version the movies gave you. The version the people who actually lived there experienced every single day. And it was nothing like what you think. Because the story of South Central in the 1980s is not a story about violence. It is a story about people who refuse to stop living their lives inside it, and what that actually required of them. Every single morning. To understand what South Central became in the 1980s, you have to understand what it was before. Because it was not always what the world came to know it as. South Central was a community, a real one, with churches on corners that had been standing for 40 years. Barbershops where the same men had been getting the same haircut from the same barber since the 1950s. Front porches, block parties. Families who had lived next door to each other for 2 and 3 generations. Central Avenue had once been called the West Coast Harlem. Jazz clubs lined the street. Black-owned businesses anchored the blocks. A hotel so grand that Langston Hughes and Thurgood Marshall had both walked through its doors. The neighborhood had produced Etta James. Jefferson High School had a music program so strong it became known across the country. It had produced generations of working people who woke up every morning and went to jobs at the plants and the factories and the shipyards that ran through South Los Angeles. Stable jobs, union jobs, jobs that paid enough to own a home and raise children and build something that lasted. It was not a perfect neighborhood. The LAPD had always treated it like occupied territory. Opportunities that existed everywhere else in the city were harder to reach from South Central. But there was a foundation, a texture to daily life that people who grew up there remembered for the rest of their lives. By the late 1970s, that foundation was already cracking under the weight of forces the neighborhood had no control over. The plants were beginning to close, the union jobs were disappearing, and then something arrived in the early 1980s that finished what deindustrialization had started. It arrived fast, and it changed everything. Director John Singleton grew up in South Central. He described what happened in the early 1980s in one sentence. In 6 months, everything changed. Crack cocaine arrived in South Central like nothing the neighborhood had ever encountered. It wasn't just a drug. It was an entirely new economy dropped into a community where the old economy had already collapsed. A single rock of crack cost as little as $2.50. Cheap enough that almost anyone could afford it. Addictive enough to guarantee they would come back tomorrow. And profitable enough that a teenager standing on a corner could make more in a single week than his mother made working a full month. In communities where legitimate work had dried up, the crack economy filled every empty space immediately. Corners that had been gathering spots became open-air markets. Buildings that had been homes became traps. The gangs that had existed before were territorial. Now they were businesses. And business meant protecting supply lines, which meant weapons, which meant violence at a scale the neighborhood had never seen. By 1988, Los Angeles County had an estimated 25,000 black gang members. Drive-by shootings that had been occasional became routine. Parks that families had used for decades became places you simply did not go anymore. The neighborhood did not transform gradually. It transformed in real time, season by season, block by block. And the people living inside it had to adapt in real time too, because nobody was coming to help them. Here is what a morning looked like in South Central in 1986. You wake up before your children. You get them dressed. You make breakfast if there is something to make. And before they walk out the door, you run through the rules. Walk on this side of the street, not that one. If you hear anything, you get down immediately. Don't run. Get down and stay down. Come straight home after school. Not through the park, not past that corner. Straight home. Then you stand at the front window and you watch them until you cannot see them anymore. And then you spend the rest of the day waiting for them to come back. Schools in South Central in the 1980s were overcrowded and underfunded. Teachers who genuinely cared were surrounded by conditions that made caring feel like it wasn't enough. One student who attended junior high in South Central in the mid-80s described it directly. Gang violence was common, and respect for teachers was absent. That was not an unusual experience. That was the standard one. Getting through the school day without becoming a target was itself an achievement. Children in South Central developed a kind of awareness that children in other parts of Los Angeles never needed. They learned which streets belonged to which gang. They learned what colors not to wear in which neighborhood. They learned to read a corner the way a sailor reads the sky before a storm. Who was standing there? How they were standing. Whether crossing to the other side of the street was necessary, and how to do it without making it obvious. This knowledge was not written down anywhere. It was absorbed through observation. Through near misses, through watching what happened to people who did not know the rules, it became second nature. Because it had to, and then the sun went down, and South Central became a different place entirely. By the mid-1980s, most families in the affected neighborhoods had a version of the same rule. You were inside before dark, not because your parents were strict, because everyone understood what outside after dark meant. The helicopters came at night. The LAPD's Air Support Division was the largest law enforcement helicopter fleet in the world, and they flew over South Central constantly. The searchlight swept across rooftops, across backyards, across the narrow spaces between apartment buildings. Residents described the sound of the helicopter as the permanent soundtrack of the neighborhood, a constant low thrum overhead, always present, always circling, a reminder that the police were watching, which meant something had already happened or was about to. You learned to sleep through it. You had no choice. Gunshots at night were not exceptional. They were background noise. The question was not whether you heard them. The question was how close they were. Far enough away, and you turned over and went back to sleep. Close enough, and you rolled off the bed and got low on the floor. Parents taught their children this reflex the way parents in other neighborhoods taught their children to look both ways before crossing the street. It was survival information, passed down because it needed to be passed down, because the alternative was not knowing, and not knowing could get you killed. Mothers lay awake, listening, counting, calculating distance from the sound, deciding whether to wake the children or let them sleep. Making that calculation so many nights in a row that it stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like breathing. By 1988, the scale of what was happening in South Central had finally broken through to the rest of the city. That year, a young woman named Karen Toshima was shot and killed in Westwood, a safe neighborhood miles from South Central. She was caught in crossfire between gang members who had no connection to where she was standing. The city called it a crisis. Politicians demanded action. The LAPD launched Operation Hammer. 1,000 officers flooding the streets of South Central. Mass arrests, warrantless stops, the kind of response that should have arrived years earlier. What the residents of South Central wanted to say was simple. We have been living inside this crisis for years. Where were you? By the late 1980s, there were blocks in South Central where a trip to the gas station after dark required a specific calculation, where the corner store that should have taken 5 minutes required a planned route, where a wrong turn onto the wrong block could mean a confrontation that had nothing to do with you personally and everything to do with where your feet happened to be standing. Basketball courts that should have been full of teenagers sat empty in the afternoons. Parks that should have been loud with children on weekends were quiet. The ordinary, spontaneous movement of people through a neighborhood contracted. People moved through South Central more deliberately, more carefully, with a constant low-level awareness of everything around them that never fully switched off. Fear had become a form of navigation. Not paralyzing fear, not the kind that stops you from functioning. The other kind, the kind you carry so long it becomes part of how you move through the world. The kind you stop noticing because you cannot afford to notice it. Here is what never made it into the news coverage. The people of South Central were not defined by what was happening around them. They were living inside it, raising children inside it, going to church inside it, watching out for neighbors inside it. The same block that had a drug corner on one end had a grandmother on the other end who had lived in the same house for 30 years and was not leaving. The same street that felt dangerous at night was a street where people knew each other by name, where someone would notice if you did not come home. South Central in the 1980s was not a war zone that happened to have people living inside it. It was a community that happened to be at war, with poverty, with a drug that had been dropped into an already broken economy, with a police department that treated the entire neighborhood like enemy territory, with a city that had spent decades making sure there was no easy way out. And the people inside it navigated all of it. Every morning, every night, every school run, every trip to the store, every hour of lying still and listening and calculating and deciding. Not because they had no choice, but because it was home. It was their home. And for many of them, it still is. Which part of Los Angeles history should we uncover next? Drop it in the comments.